One of the most important parts of becoming a runner is getting the right footwear and knowing whether you need an insole or not, an orthotic. There's two types of feet on the extremes. There's a real rigid foot, and the best way to know if you have a rigid foot is just sit down and measure your foot on a ruler, stand up and measure it, and if there's no change in the length of your foot from standing to sitting, you have a stiff, rigid foot. The other extreme is if you have a flexible foot, then when you sit down and measure your foot's shorter than it is when you stand up. Now, the benefits of either. If you have a rigid foot, you're extremely stable. If you have a flexible foot, you have good shock absorption. Now, a rigid foot, when you raise it off the ground in a running shoe, it's safe because the foot is stiff and the shoe is cushioned, so it's much easier to find a good running shoe when you have a stiff foot. And when you have a rigid foot, the only things that touch the ground in a wet foot test is the ball of the foot and the heel. So you can see how this shoe is arched in the middle just like a rigid foot would be because it has a high arch. On the other end of the spectrum, a flat foot, a flexible foot, needs a lot more support because you have to support the whole foot because the whole foot's flattening to the ground. So you can see this shoe type here is designed for a flatter foot because it's continuous as opposed to this shoe that has an arch to it. So if your foot doesn't have an arch, the bottom of your shoe will look like it doesn't have one. And if your foot does have an arch, you'll see an arch underneath the foot, underneath the shoe as well. So those are really important distinctions because if you had a rigid foot and you put it into a big shoe like this, it's not going to hurt you. It's just going to be more shoe than you need. However, if you put a real flexible foot into a minimal shoe like this, injuries immediately because you need the support in the midfoot, and this shoe would collapse on a flat foot. So when you're deciding on footwear, you have to become an expert on yourself. It's worth taking the time to see if your foot's rigid or flexible. And the other thing that people make a big mistake on is they tend to wear their shoes too small. They think that the size they wear in their dress shoes would be the size they wear in their running shoes. And there's usually a size to a size and a half difference. And one of the main reasons is that the padding they put inside the shoe takes up room. So the same size system that works for a dress shoe makes a running shoe too small. And if your toes are hitting the end of the shoe, not only do you get bruised toenails, but your foot can't move and work its natural shock absorption because it's being held up by the end of the shoe.